Alright guys, welcome back to another class. Today's class is going to cover a very important character in the meta, okay? And that is Clove. Clove is currently one of the most picked characters across all elos, and that is for a reason. We're going to cover a little bit about what exactly it is that makes Clove really good, and some other things that you really need to know before you click on Clove as a character, okay? Big reminder, we're trying to reach 1,000 subscribers. Once we do, we're going to give a C9 jersey giveaway. Okay, it's a really important giveaway. It's a really important milestone for us to cover. So go ahead and kind of subscribe if you can. So let's move on to the content. In order for you to understand Clove, you got to understand that Clove is a controller. Their kit is that of a controller. And a lot of people tend to get that wrong. And a lot of people also tend to get really annoyed when the Insta-lock Clove doesn't really know how to smoke. So whenever you're thinking about picking up Clove for your roster, it is important for us to understand that they're going to be a smokes character. So we're going to be talking a little bit about just how it is that you should be using your controller skills. And then we're going to be talking about the kit with some examples that will cover just that. Okay. And after that, I'm just going to do a little bit of a summary, just talking about the tips that you really need to know. Okay. So right at the beginning, what are smokes? Okay. If you're just new to the game, smokes are an ability that controllers mainly tend to have that are really good at essentially covering sightlines and providing cover. When you're playing a controller, your main job is to chop up the map in a way that is more feasible for your team to be able to take control of. You're essentially splitting the map into more controllable portions, and therefore the controller part of the name. Okay, there's three types of smokes, and these are the categories that we're going to be naming them as. Okay, there's wall smokes. This one over here, Viper and Harbor, both have really good wall smokes. And the way that they work is that they have really long uptime and they have some form of debuff. So if you look at something like Viper, there's a Decay, less HP, right? That's a one debuff that you might have. Harbor slows you down upon entry, so that's the other debuff that you might have to worry about. Orb smokes are a little bit different. They're pretty much, as the name dictates, they're orbs. They're just spheres that you can use to control around the map. And they're very versatile. When you're using orb smokes, you got to make sure that you're paying attention to how you're using these smokes, because we're going to talk about it in just a moment. There's ways in which you can kind of screw up your team with the way that you're covering these angles. The other thing that really helps with the versatility is the range, okay? You're going to notice over here, we have one wall and it is down. That's it. That thing is down and it's not going anywhere. Same thing with Harbor's wall. When you're putting that wall, there's really not a lot of things you can do unless you're really good at maneuvering the little MS Paint tool that is his signature ability. Now, when it comes to range, there's a lot of different ways in which you can use these orb smokes, but we'll just get into that in just a sec. Last but not least, we have supplemental smokes. So I used Cypher as an example. Other examples of it might be Phoenix with his wall. That technically does count as a wall smoke. Jet as a smoke. I mean, that one's pretty straightforward, right? It's called a smoke, right? These are things that you can use. Same thing with the Cypher cage right there. Most of the time, they have some form of ability that makes it really good. So for example, Phoenix can provide a self-heal and can also damage the opponents. There's a little bit of a sound cue whenever someone enters Cypher's cage. And last but not least, when we're talking about Jet, they can maneuver them around to the point that they can hit really cool one-ways, okay? If you've ever seen maybe like a Jet masterclass before, they usually tend to touch on that maneuverability. So when we're looking at these three classes, we need to understand that Clove is an orb smoke. So we're going to be talking about it in terms of this range and versatility when we're talking about their smokes. Okay, so whenever we're talking about smokes, we need to know how to properly smoke. So how do you smoke? Whenever you're wondering about which smoke you need to use, you got to remember that the bottom line is blocking up the sightline. There's 3 points that you have to cover when you're properly smoking. The first one is you got to make sure that it prevents how the enemy takes space. So when we're looking at these two differences right here, if you're able to spot them, if you're able to kind of notice over here, you're going to see that this smoke is sticking out a little bit more than this one right here. This gives the opponent a chance to be able to push in and give them way more space, giving your team an extra angle to have to worry about. Not only could they just jump out for free with all of this cover, but they could also take this wide angle on your team as you're trying to prevent them from entry. That's the first one. It prevents the enemy from taking space. So make sure that they're kind of like flush like so it doesn't kind of do anything in regards to what I just mentioned. Number 2, it blocks the sideline. Pretty straightforward. You're going to notice that this smoke right here, it was really rushed. So you're going to see that there's a little bit of an opening. And if anybody's playing around this area, they're going to be dealing a lot of damage. Make sure that you're dealing with this area right here. Last but not least, you're separating the enemy, okay, from your team. So this one's pretty straightforward. You're pretty much segmenting an area of the map, as we talked about. And this is the whole point of using these smokes. So here's a little neat thing that I kind of made up, okay? If it is flush and neat, it won't be beat. Pretty much, simply enough, if the area is flush, you're going to be fine. Okay, 99% of the time, that is the smoke you should be going for. Now, I did a class not too long ago talking about extra smokes that you can really think about besides your usual one-way, such as site splits or the ones that kind of stick out. So if you want to kind of pay attention to those and learn a little bit more about them, you can kind of check that video out. Okay. But in general, this is pretty much how smokes should be. You can say, what about defense? Same thing. Make sure that the smoke is flush right across the center here, and you're blocking up these chokes, these sidelines. Okay, same idea. So with that out of the way, we got to understand that controllers are very important. And when we're looking at the importance of controllers, you got to be aware that these controllers, right, have to stay alive. Now, when we talk about Clove, one of their signature abilities, the Ruse, I believe it's called, their smokes, they can put them down even though they're dead. Okay, despite death, they can still put them down. But because of the range that they're going to have, and we'll talk about range in just a moment, we got to be aware that you still need to provide value in some way. So this is why whenever you're picking up a controller, be aware that you need to be alive. So whenever you're entering, you might be the 4th person in, potentially the 5th, or maybe even the 3rd if you're aggressive, such as Clove is on the team, right? So be very mindful when you're doing something like that as you're trying to stay alive when you're helping your team, okay? So with that out of the way, let's look up some of the things that you can do when you're using Clove as a controller. First thing, controllers have range. Clove has range. When it comes to the controller over here, I even managed to kind of give you a little bit of a diagram. You can see that they are not able to fully cover the entirety of the map. It's pretty close, but that's only because of their position. So because of the range, when you're picking up Clove, be very mindful of your position. Okay? So normally when you play something like Lotus, maybe for example, Icebox, other maps that are pretty long, or Haven, right? You're going to have to pay close attention to your position. Clove has it pretty easy here. Just playing mid allows them to just really easily control both sidelines, even mid, but it doesn't really fit this nicely across all map pools, okay? Some maps might have it, some maps might not, and positioning is really important. And this is why I have to talk about the position that you pick is really dependent on what you're trying to do. On defense, normally I'll tell you to just play around the middle area as much as you can, or be very ready to rotate as quickly as possible. And this is one of the things that makes Clove really powerful in terms of how useful they are at climbing and ranked. Because the way that you look at it is the more impact they have in a round, the higher chance or a higher likelihood they have to just be more impactful overall. It increases their RR gains, right? There's a lot of things that are really useful when you're always rotating first. So whenever you're paying attention to the position you are in, make sure that you have a plan in mind to what you're trying to do and be ready to rotate first. Easily rotatable spots, like for example, mid in this example, are the best place to go. So if you're playing in a map and you don't know where to go, let's say it's a 3-site map, pick B. If it's a map that's pretty open, pick mid, right? Try to make sure you're always ready to rotate out as quickly as possible and be ready to mobilize, okay? As long as you have a plan with who's holding mid with you or who's going to be helping you control that spot, you should be ready to go and you should be okay. When you're playing defense, again, middle of the map is good to go. Now, we talked about entry just a little bit ago. We talked about how you should be paying attention to for example, making sure you're the 4th or 3rd or even the 5th person in, and that is because you need to stick close to your team. We talked about range. You're going to notice that you don't really have a lot of space in controlling everything. If Clove was over here on A and the team was, on B and the team was over here on A, they're not going to be able to give that smoke, meaning that as Clove, you should not be lurking. Use it sparingly. You can use it as a form of fake. You can use it as a form of kind of providing some information elsewhere, maybe a default, but you should not be lurking. And that is the last bit that you need to know on attack. Don't lurk. Make sure that you're always ready to go. Make sure you're ready to rotate as quickly as possible. Stick close to your team on attack. Okay, so that is their kit when it comes to range. Secondly, when it comes to the smokes, they have duration. So as of right now, as of this episode, Clove smokes are the shortest. So they're not really that short by much when it comes to the difference between Astra and Clove, but Clove smokes in comparison to Brim and Omens, they're pretty short. Okay, and this is where we have to pay attention a little bit to how we're using these smokes. Number one, when you're playing defense, normally what you tend to do is just put a smoke by the choke. Like we talked about over here, you would put a smoke right here on the choke and that would pretty much cover everything down. However, because they're so short, you have to pay attention to your cooldowns. What a lot of people tend to do is, for example, they'll put a smoke over here, and this will be their one way, and they'll lose the fight. And as they're ready to go in, they'll put a second smoke down, and that will cover the choke. What just happened? You try to control a lane, and they pushed past that first area of defense, and now they're going for the second, and they're delayed. This smoke right here is the more powerful smoke, I would say, when it comes to delaying a push directly into sight. But the problem with the duration, and if you're not aware of this, you're not going to be able to fully stall across the entire time of the round. Other characters like Brim and Omen are easily able to put a smoke here and then put the other smoke down and still be able to cycle on to the next. Meaning that when you're playing something like Clove and you feel like you're having a really hard time controlling that sight lane and controlling that choke, be very mindful that there's going to be gaps in vision. So this means that the smoke is going to be down. It'll drop by maybe 5 seconds. And in that time, the enemy might either push, they might swing into an opponent, they might use a flash and maybe get one of your teammates. Be very mindful of that. So if you realize that your team is sort of falling for that and they're not really aware of those slight gaps, or they're not aware of that little timing that might happen between smokes, right? Make sure that you're paying attention to your smokes and you're not kind of putting them elsewhere if they're just focusing on controlling the choke. Okay, be mindful. Be very, very mindful of that when you're playing them on defense, and that's going to give you a huge advantage. On attack, you have a little bit of a disadvantage, considering that there's other advantages on attack, and I would say that's where Clove really shines. There's only one single downside, and that's that you need to attack a little faster, okay? Because the smokes don't last as long. If your team delays the push and your smokes are already down, there's no time where you can go, oh, okay, smokes are down, let's delay the push and then push in, as you might with something like Brim or something like Omen. You got to be ready to put down those smokes. They're almost immediate when you put them down. So you got to make sure that you put them down as the team is ready to go. Because what happens is, you're going to see this a bunch. People are entering in, and the second that they're through, the smokes start falling down. And now they're in the open, and there's really nothing that you can do, and your smokes are not ready to cycle in just yet. Okay? So that's one thing that you really have to be mindful of when you're playing Clove. Okay? Because what happens is, if you're not really going in immediately as the smokes come down, you're going to get timing. Okay, so I really, really suggest that you tell your team, hey, it's time to go. Okay, if your team waits a little bit longer, maybe for example, between 5 to 10 seconds, you should cancel the push. And I know that seems like a waste of smokes. Maybe you got baited by your team thinking that you're going to go in, and then they don't. Make sure to let them know the smokes are no longer going to happen. Cancel the push. Look for a pick elsewhere. Or maybe stay on there and maybe re-hit much later. Because what's going to happen is your team is going to lose that push. Okay? So be very mindful, again, of that duration. Okay, last but not least, when it comes to the smokes, they have a weird UI. Very similar to the iPad that pretty much Brim has. Okay? So when you're looking at the way that you could put down those smokes, you could make some one-ways. It's still a versatile smoke that you could use, okay? Make sure that you're paying attention to how you're using it, but at the same time, it's pretty easy to get some value. Still, it's a really good smoke to use. You can do one-ways, like for example, over here on Ascent, you can put it on A main. You can put it on A short on bind. You can make this double really cool smoke over here by Icebox if you choose to play Clove. And things like over here on Sunset, where you can control 2 one-ways over here by either controlling it by lobby or over here by the short area. Okay, so there's some things that you could do with Clove, so you're not really super limited when it comes to one-ways, but you are limited to the point of Brim's UI, okay, because that's as close as I can make it. If you're really curious about making a good one-way, make sure that you put the middle of the dot in the UI where you want to put it, then that should be pretty much it. Okay, it's a pretty easy thing. Explore around, try to see other things that you can make one-ways of, okay, and try to make sure that you're always trying to, catch the opponent off guard by making these one-ways and try to pressure the opponent, okay? But that's pretty much it. You still can one-way. Don't worry too much about it. It's still a pretty strong smoke, okay? So don't be too discouraged by using something like that. Now let's talk about the rest of their kit. The first one is Meddle. Okay, Meddle seems to be one of those one of those abilities to me that players are underutilizing, and that is because they think that whenever they use it, they need to kind of follow through with it. So a good example is understanding what it is about. Okay, so before we get into that, let's talk about what it is. So Meddle is kind of like a nade. It's kind of like a grenade that you can use. Okay, you basically throw it onto an area, there's a little bit of a timer, it explodes, and it decays the opponent immediately. So what decay means, if you're not really too familiar with the game, it pretty much takes down their HP to a certain value, and it just stays there for a small period of time before it temporarily comes back up, and now they get their full HP back. Okay, so things that you need to understand is that, number one, there needs to be an LOS between the center of the explosion and the target you're hitting. So for example, over here, it's pretty apparent that anybody standing in this area is going to get hit. But what if you're ever playing over here by Lotus and it hits the top of this box over here by Rubble? If you're under it, even if the splash zone hits you, you're not going to get hit by it. Okay, there's an LOS necessary when you're using Meddle onto the opponent. So if they're right under it and they manage to dodge it just by a little bit, they're not going to get hit. Be very mindful of that. Number two, it detonates on a timer. It's not an impact. It's not like it hits something and then immediately splashes damage. It needs to detonate. So try to get a really good familiarity with the distance that you need to have so you have a really good impact on the Meddle. Okay, so usually players tend to have a really good gauge of the distance that you need to have. It's not that difficult to kind of gain, so just kind of pay attention to that when you're using it. But normally after it hits the ground and it's on the floor, that timer starts. Okay, that's usually your best indication of when to know. Last but not least, decay is temporary. It's not going to be forever. So now that we understand how the ability tends to work, the best way to utilize it is to basically try to combo with utility. Okay. And the second thing is to understand that you can't just keep it for that perfect moment. The best way that I've seen people use the Meddle is simply by thinking of it as a molly. Okay. So for example, let's say the enemy is pushing you and you have a little Meddle right here. What is going to happen is it's either A, going to temporarily disable them because they're not going to be able to fully enter while their HP is down, or it's going to act as a molly because if they get hit while they're in the smoke over here, for example, they're not going to push you, right? So try to just use it in these choke points. It's going to be really good at delaying a push and preventing an enemy from pushing. Okay, so that is the best way that I found that Meddle tends to work. People tend to just hold on to it because they think, I need to throw it, and then once they're decayed, I need to swing, and my team needs to swing, and that's the best way to get value out of my Meddle. And normally you would think so. I mean, you want to make sure that you're not wasting utility. But if you're doing it with the intention of controlling choke points, if you're doing it with the intention of delaying, you're already doing enough. And that is the best part about using Meddle. This is the best part of their kit, Pick Me Up. So when you're looking at Pick Me Up, it is more than just a heal. More people tend to now use it as a way of kind of healing, like a Reyna heal, okay? The way that Reyna works is you get a kill and now you're able to kind of heal from that. It works pretty much the same way. If you get a kill or an assist, you're now able to activate this ability. However, what people tend to overlook is that there's a speed boost behind it. The way that it works is immediately upon moving, you have a little bit of a ramp up and then you're fully on full speed. In this example right here, you're going to see that I'm able to just use this Pick Me Up to be able to swing the second opponent. And they're not able to catch because of how fast I'm moving. You're able to easily outmaneuver opponents and deal with multiple opponents at the same time simply because of the speed boost. You can use it in a variety of different ways. My recommendation is if you're going to push right after a kill, pop it. It doesn't matter if you didn't lose any HP. It's going to be a really strong entry tool. And you can combine it with other things like we're going to talk about, such as their ult. Okay, so make sure you're looking at that speed boost. It is a stronger benefit, in my opinion, than the actual heal itself, because the heal only heals you temporarily to full HP, or however much HP you lost, right? Full HP, the thing about the full HP is it is temporary and it's going to go down, so you might as well just focus on trying to play aggressive with that heal. With that speed boost. Okay, so the stronger benefit comes from the speed boost. Make sure you're looking at it. If you're not going to be pushing, or your team is delaying a push, or they're not ready to push with you, then don't pop it. Even if the full HP would be helpful, don't pop it. There's no point, unless you're like at 2 HP, then maybe, right? But there's not a lot of benefit coming from that. Okay, so there's a huge advantage when it comes to Pick Me Up. All of these abilities combined together work for one thing, and that is the ult. The ultimate is a really strong entry tool. And you're going to notice from this example right here, you're going to see that the team is ready to push. I got a kill, didn't pop, pick me up just yet. There was no reason for me to do so. Once the team started pushing up, I didn't want to pop it since I was in the middle, but I then got a chance to use my ult. My ultimate basically acted as an extra player in this push, as I was able to fully control the sight lines and I was able to fully control the area as I was taking control of this site over by B. Okay, make sure that you're using it other than just the obvious, oh, I died, I can pick it back up. There's a temporary amount of time that you have before you can get your next kill. So if you can't get that kill or you can't get that assist, you're not going to be able to get the full rest. Okay, you can use it as a form of entry, as it works pretty similar to Phoenix, as in you can basically chase opponents down. You can use it to give your team more space, as the opponent might run away from you whenever you pop it. So make sure you're paying close attention to how you're going to be using this, and make sure you use the invulnerability that you see over here at the beginning from the death, right? You can see that when you pop it, there's invulnerability attached to this repositioning aspect of the ult. So make sure that you're using it to give information to the team. Try to make sure that you're using it as a way to get more space in advance on the opponents, or just simply reposition so you can pop out of it safely, right? So make sure that you're using it as a way to entry against the opponent. Make sure that you're using it as a form of entry like Phoenix ult. You don't have to way behind the rest of the team if you're ready to push with the team, and that's the whole point of the push. Let's do an A rush. Okay, I have ult. I'm gonna entry with you guys. Okay, easy, right? You don't have to stay behind, and make sure that those smokes are down. You can entry right alongside the team. A little bit of a side thing, as an attacker, when the spike is down, if your entire team is dead and the spike is down, you can still pop your ult. So you can use it as a form of extra delay, or you can use it to finish a fight. However, defenders don't get this perk. So what I usually tell players is if you have a hard time getting your ult down because the team keeps constantly dying, if you have a duo, tell them to stay alive. If you don't, try to make sure that you're letting whoever's with you to stay behind. Hey, don't push with me. I am going to ult after my ult. And sorry, I'm going to ult after my death, and then I'm going to help you take whatever space that you need. Okay? Make sure you're coordinating that spacing between you and your teammate, as sometimes it's really valuable to keep that teammate alive so you can use your ult, which might provide more value on that entry or that retake. With that out of the way, let's really quickly recap and summarize. Okay, Clove uses orb smokes. Be very wary of that range. So try to play around the middle of the map if possible. Try to be ready to rotate, play in those easily rotatable spots away from the, where you really need to be. Okay, there's a lot of different ways of using the smokes because they're orb smokes. So one ways are really, really powerful. Flush smokes are really useful, again, to control enemy choke points. And last but not least, try to not die early. Okay, those are really important tips that you really need to understand as a controller. Now, when it comes to the kit, Meddle is a really strong combo tool and really strong molly that you can use for preventing pushes, right? And you can use things like Pick Me Up as a way to sort of maintain a really strong frag potential whenever you're trying to push. So in this example right here, you're going to see I get a frag right at the beginning from a Reyna that I think pushes me right here, and I'm able to easily get the rest of the team fights just because I was able to pop that Pick Me Up, okay? Strong fragging tool. Last but not least, you can see that now that I have my ult, I was able to use it as a form of re-entry and retake. Okay, make sure you're looking into that whenever you're playing with your teammates. And last but not least, that's pretty much it. Just have fun when you're playing Clove. Okay, it's a really strong character. You're going to be climbing really, really consistently as long as you keep these tool tips in mind. So with that out of the way, we're going to conclude the class. Thank you guys for watching. We're going to be starting our question period here.